but I've been here a good part of that time. I came in the early 1960s. That was a time of change in Clarendon. There had been a split, and the pain was still very deep here. Ben McDonald, as Peg, I think, told you, had left. He was very popular. He joined the Peace Corps. And as luck would have it, there was an interim pastor here who was the Synod Executive for Westminster Fellowship out in Ohio, and I knew him then. So it seemed like this was a good fit. After a short period of time, the church hired a very activist pastor from way out west, a little farther west than the current activist pastor. He was from Burley, Idaho, and he wasn't quite as activist in some areas as the current pastor, yet he was radical for his time. And that caused a little bit of a problem with some of the more conservative members of the church. So one day they called him in and they said, you know, we don't like the subjects you've been preaching on. We want you to preach on, and they gave him a list. The list was peace and love, among others, and there were a whole bunch. The next Sunday, Ken got up and gave a roaring sermon that covered every one of those points. After that, he went on as he had done before. One of his sermons caused the Washington Post to cover the church, and as far as I know, that was the only time the Washington Post ever covered one of the sermons from this church. It was a time when the Beatles had made the statement, "We're more popular than God." So Ken titled the sermon, "What if the Beatles are right?" And it caused quite a stir in the congregation, but it brought a lot of publicity. Didn't bring much more, but it brought that. And at that time, one of the activist things we were doing was advocating for fair housing. Arlington was still pretty much segregated residential-wise, and so our church took part in a neighborhood survey. And I recall being welcomed at some houses and at others told where I could put my petition. That was just one of the things that we did. We also had collections for the Equality Fund. And some of the conservative people in the church, some of the members, very dear members, I mean, they're all my friends and I love them dearly, but they were a little more conservative than others, complained. And so we had quite an interesting discussion. We had a couple of members who were, they were probably farther left than David, and considerably older than David. And so Essa, the female, asked, well, what don't you like about the envelope? Well, the envelope has chains on it. And it was something about break the chains. And she said, well, that's okay. You know, just use a plain envelope and put your offering in, which he did. Also, you know, it was one of those things. They complained about, they didn't want integrated housing. You know, I don't want black people living next to me. And she said, no, I don't believe you mean that for a minute. What if Carl Rowan wanted to move next door? Well, that's different. It depended on, apparently, which black people moved next door. And that was just kind of nice to see that little friendly banter back and forth, not like today's society where you can't disagree without getting really angry at each other. Our church was the headquarters for the Poor People's Campaign, which resulted in a tent city down by the Lincoln Memorial. And I brought a show and tell. we had this graphic that became the symbol of the Poor People's Campaign. It's been suggested I put it here. It's two hands, for those of you who can't see it, one black and one white. And this is a rather yellow copy. It was not framed properly by a poor framer. But Prender House, which we now call Dill House and rent out, was the headquarters. And our church was given the job of collecting certain food. If I stand back here, easier. And flour was one of our requirements. So even though a number of the people in the church didn't agree with the project, every Sunday they brought their bag of flour and they brought their items that we're supposed to collect. And that just showed how people could disagree, but we got together and cooperated in whatever we did. We had a very small youth group at the time, and even then you could move up fast in the church circles here. My second Sunday, I was approached by the seminarian who was the youth director, and he said, I'm leaving, and I want you to take over the which I did, and I became very good friends with the senior high kids that were in the group. It was small, and we kept saying, maybe we should merge with another church or do something, and they said, no, we're small, but we like it the way it is. They were as conservative as their parents in that regard. Part of the deal with the Poor People's Campaign was we made sandwiches. So I loaded up a bunch of kids from this church and some kids from Wakefield High School, and we went over into the district, and I can't recall where, but it was the far eastern side of the city, and we were making sandwiches, and one of the leaders of the project said, okay, now you have to put on these little plastic bags while you're making the sandwiches. And one of the kids said, why do we have to be so clean? We washed our hands. Those people are living out there in tents in the dirt. You know, you think that they don't have germs. But that was the rule, so we did it. Now, I know in the past, and I'm sorry, it's kind of jumping around because when you reach gray-haired stage, you can't always remember the exact chronology of things. But you heard that Clarendon was one of the first churches to ordain women session members. As I found out when I tried to nominate one of the more liberal women in the church as a session member, I was told we have an unwritten rule. There are only 3 women on the session. The session was 12 people at the time. So 3 out of 12 could be women, but no more. That changed after a bit, and one election time, nominations were made from the floor, one of whom was the daughter of the church secretary, Linda Arthur, and the other was me. We were elected over members of the slate that was put forth, and that caused a bit of a stir. And so when we had our meeting with the session to question us about our whatever, usually these meetings were very ordinary. Well, how are you? How are things going with your family? What, you know, blah, blah, blah. This one was not. This one was the most outrageous inquiry into our beliefs and Bible knowledge and you name it. And it was a very unpleasant experience. But after that, Linda resigned. And I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. I was going to stay on just to irritate him. and in fact, piss him off. Which I probably did. Anyway, it was an interesting time. It was the start of my career as a session member of the church. During that time, we actually had quite a number of things that are still going on. We started the Child Care Center, was seen as a need, and so Ken Beal, the minister at the time, had a daughter who was interested in getting child care going. So Pam organized the Child Care Center, and it's still operating today, although not as an arm of the church. It got to the point where it was a financial burden on the congregation, and we turned the reins over to them, and they became a rental tenant. This was also the time when St. Coletta's School for retarded children needed a home, and so the lower floor of the Sunday school rooms became the home for St. Coletta's School. We were part of an overall do-gooder group in Arlington. The various churches got together. There was a Central Arlington Parish, which we were a member of, and a South Arlington Parish. For some reason, the North Arlington churches belonged to the Central Arlington Parish. But there were the two parish councils, and then they would get together for meetings periodically. I was elected to represent the session on the Central Arlington Parish Council, and one night when we were there, they said, we need a director for the Emergency Food Committee. If you packed boxes at AFAC, they're little boxes about so big, it was designed to feed a family for 2 or 3 days, strictly in an emergency thing. So anyway, my name was put in, and the treasurer told me I had to accept because he was from Trinity Presbyterian Church, and the resigning chairman of the food committee was also a member at the Trinity. And he said, we need to keep the Emergency Food Committee in Presbyterian hands. That didn't seem like a particularly good reason to me, but anyway, there I was. And it was at this time our church went into a unicameral system of government. So instead of having 12 session members and I think 9 trustees and 6 deacons elected, we went into a one unicameral board. Also at this time, we elected our first youth member of the session. Now, I could be wrong in that, but I'm pretty sure that was at this time when one of the high school kids was elected as a session member. And, that was probably unheard of at the time. We cooperated in a great number of things. Feeding other people was part of the mission of the church. We participated in FISH for immediate sympathetic help. You could call a number and somebody would come and take you to the doctor's office or drive you here or there or bring you a food kit, one of these different things. Amen, Arlingtonians ministering to emergency needs, and Meals on Wheels. We had a small but very active congregation, and as it got smaller and smaller, these projects became more of a cooperative venture between St. Charles and us. So the two churches combined to fund to staff these different operations. But Clarendon has had a very long history of being active in the community and probably much more than our resources would ever show that we could do. One of our members was head of the state board of PTA. We've just had a lot of influence. People got nourished here and went out and spread the good news. And that was the 60s and 70s as I remember it.